Welcome. It's really wonderful and quite a privilege to welcome this audience, this group, this very distinguished group this evening to the National Security College here at the Australian National University. I'm Rory Medcalf, the head of the college, and we have a very special event this evening. We will hear shortly, of course, from the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, Heather Cook. Before I begin, I'll acknowledge country, acknowledge that we're having this conversation this evening on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, the custodians of this land, and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I also welcome and acknowledge the fact that we have an exceptional representation here this evening of the leadership of the policy, law enforcement, intelligence and legal communities. I fear too many agency heads, commissioners, secretaries, and other distinguished colleagues for me to mention here, but perhaps we'll list you a little later on during the proceedings. But it's, I think, a very powerful reflection of not only the importance, the significance of the remarks that Heather Cook will be delivering shortly, but really of the whole of nation response to the national security risks and challenges that Australia faces today. And I would like to think a vote of confidence in the work of the National Security College as a trusted partner as well. We'll also shortly be joined by the Dean of the College of Law, Governance and Policy at the university, who will represent the Vice-Chancellor in closing remarks. Now, to set the scene for this evening's proceedings, it's worth thinking a little about how the threat of serious and organised crime affects Australia's interests, the values, the safety, the rights of Australian citizens, Australian people and residents, and really everything that we hold dear in this world. We will hear shortly about two groundbreaking reports opening the books, I think bringing light, data, transparency on these challenges. And I believe that is part of a broader national conversation. Now, this is the first address of its kind by a Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission. It comes in the context, though, of a security environment where I believe there is a growing public appetite for information. Anxiety, yes, but also a recognition that the community as a whole needs to play its part in meeting the challenges of the time. We've heard recently, of course, from a number of other leaders of the national security community, in fact, present in the room today, and I note particularly the Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police, Chrissy Barrett, whose speech at the Press Club recently, I think, cast a really stark light on the responsibilities and challenges of the AFP. The remarks as well by the Director General for Security, Mike Burgess, recently at the Lowy Institute, and other elements of the national conversation that we've heard of recently. If I can just say a word about the work the National Security College is doing before I invite our distinguished guests to speak today, I would say that the National Security College, as an institution that was established to build national capability principally through education, has in recent years sought to widen the aperture of that conversation. And so the work that we're currently doing on community consultations, engaging with a cross-section of the Australian community to understand Australians' perception of risk, I believe also harmonises very well with the work of our agencies in building, in a responsible and trusted way, that national conversation. And at that point, I would really like to welcome Heather Cook. Heather needs no introduction to you, but of course, as the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, Heather builds on a career that has spanned intelligence and policy, governance, leadership, not only across the security community, and I think I can say on the record senior roles with ASIO, with the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, with the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, with the private sector, but also work here at the National Security College as one of our very valued mentors and distinguished advisors. And so I am slightly disappointed that you were stolen back into the system from the wonderful work that you were doing with us, cultivating next generation leaders at the National Security College. In fact, in this room this evening, we have the current cohort of our senior executive course, which I know is something that you've done a lot over the years to help us develop. So please join me now in welcoming Heather Cook.
Thank you very much, Rory, for that warm welcome, and thank you all for joining us here this evening. I'm delighted to be here as the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, and also the Director of the Australian Institute of Criminology. Can I begin by acknowledging some of our distinguished guests who are with us tonight? Secretary of the Department of Finance, Matt Yiannopoulos, AFP Commissioner Chrissy Barrett, Director General of Security, Mike Burgess, ABF Commissioner Gav Reynolds, Illicit Tobacco and E-Security Commissioner Amber Schuta, Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, the Honourable Christopher Jessup, Commonwealth Ombudsman Ian Anderson, Chief Police Officer of the ACT, Scott Lee, the head, Catherine McMullen, the head of AGO, Acting Director of Public Prosecutions, Marc de Crepigny. Thank you all for joining us tonight. So today I am here to discuss something that affects almost every Australian, often in ways that are hidden, underestimated, or misunderstood: serious and organised crime. There's no doubt that the criminal landscape in Australia has fundamentally shifted. Today's serious and organised crime networks are borderless, decentralised, digitally enabled, and increasingly embedded within legitimate systems. Many now operate with the agility and sophistication of multinational businesses. They're strategic, networked, and adaptive. Tonight, I'm also pleased to launch 2 public reports: the ACIC's Opening the Books, The Impact of Serious and Organised Crime in 2025, and a report by the Australian Institute of Criminology, The Costs of Serious and Organised Crime, 2023-24. Together, the purpose of these reports is to present the facts and provide clarity of how serious and organised crime operates, the widespread harm it causes, and how it is evolving in the modern world. The reports reveal, in stark detail, the scale, complexity, and damage caused by serious and organised crime. This is also why I'm coming forward now to talk openly about what we know, what we face as a nation, and to highlight the important work we do with our many partners across the country and overseas to counter this pervasive and insidious threat. Popular culture has had a tendency to romanticize organised crime. Through films and series like The Godfather, Narcos, Breaking Bad, while compelling and entertaining, they obscure the real-world consequences: the violence, the death, exploitation and victimization, the corruption, and the billions of dollars in economic harm. There's nothing glamorous about the fear or loss and suffering inflicted on victims, on their families and the community. In the old world of organised crime, opening the book meant you were in, a made man. But I'm opening the books today because transparency is essential to trust, to effective action, and to the safety and well-being of all Australians. In response to a threat that continues to evolve at pace, we can no longer arrest our way out of the problem. Building resilience must move beyond just enforcement. It requires a national coordinated response informed by the best intelligence and research available. I'd like to spend a few moments talking about one of the organizations I lead, the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, which is often described as highly secretive. And to be fair, it has been. While we need to carefully protect our operations and capabilities, it has become equally important to shine a light on what we do and what we know. But to understand where we are today, I think it's useful to reflect on where we've come from. Over the decades, Australia has faced waves of criminal threats. From the razor gangs of the 1920s, the rise of the Calabrian Mafia, to the emergence of outlaw motorcycle gangs, to the complex transnational syndicates we see today. In the 1970s and 80s, a series of royal commissions exposed the scale of organised crime in Australia and the limitations of traditional policing. These inquiries led to the establishment in 1984 of a specialist crime-fighting agency with unique coercive powers, the National Crime Authority, which then transitioned into the Australian Crime Commission in 2003, and in 2016, the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission we have today was formed, bringing together criminal intelligence, investigative, and information sharing functions to create a truly national capability. Over this period, the ACIC has evolved from a law enforcement agency to a criminal intelligence organization, using its specialized collection and analytical capabilities to reveal and get behind the highest threat criminal organizations and syndicates, to understand the players, their networks, and methods. Our vision today is simple but ambitious: an Australia hostile to criminal exploitation. We know that effective intelligence work provides a competitive edge. If you can reveal the secrets of your enemies, you can find their weaknesses and better target your disruptive efforts. The past year has been particularly significant for the ACIC. In recognition of the complexity and scale of serious organised crime, the government took action in commissioning and in November 2024, releasing its response to the independent review of the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission and associated Commonwealth law enforcement arrangements. The review's recommendations set out a clear blueprint to further strengthen the ACIC's ability to combat the significant threat posed by serious and organised crime. We are now acting on these recommendations as a matter of priority. We're sharpening our focus on high-threat criminal behavior and applying our intelligence capabilities to obtain, analyze, and share insights that better enable our enforcement partners to target their efforts and disrupt and prevent harm. We're investing in the skills of our people, our technology, and our partnerships. And we're working closely with government to ensure our legislation empowers our role as Australia's National Criminal Intelligence Agency. Importantly, we are committed to losing the moniker of being highly secretive by enhancing public and industry engagement, as demonstrated by today's address and the release of these two public reports. While there will always be a need to protect sensitive sources, methodologies, and capabilities, there is much that can and should be shared with the public about the threat posed and impact of serious organised crime on our nation, communities, and citizens. Australia deserves our best efforts to effectively target these malign networks and their enablers, and to help harden Australia against criminal exploitation wherever it arises and whatever form it takes. When we talk about serious and organised crime, it's very easy to become overwhelmed by the scale of the problem. The statistics are staggering. In 2023-24 alone, the direct and indirect cost of organised crime to Australia reached $82.3 billion, a figure that has risen by more than $13 billion in the last 12 months. The biggest proportion of this cost is associated with the illicit drug trade, which hit $19 billion. In addition to the economic loss as a result of expenditure on illicit substances, this figure also factors in lost productivity and output due to drug dependency, illness, treatment, and death. There are also consequential costs associated with drug-fueled crime, such as burglary, vehicle theft, assaults, and other acts of violence. Unfortunately, Australians appear to have an insatiable appetite for illicit drugs. The latest report of the ACIC's National Wastewater Drug Monitoring Program revealed a dramatic surge in the consumption of 4 major illicit drugs: methamphetamine, cocaine, MDMA, and heroin. Wastewater analysis revealed that in a single year, Australians consumed a shocking 22.2 tons of these substances, marking a 34% increase from the previous year and the highest level recorded since monitoring began in 2016. This escalation is obviously deeply concerning, particularly as meth, which causes significant health and community harm, accounts for over half of this consumption. These volumes represent the scale of the challenge facing not only law enforcement and intelligence agencies, but also health and community services nationally. The second most significant cost is attributed to serious financial crime. Organised criminals target Australia's banking, investment, and superannuation and tax sectors, as well as individuals, businesses, and government entities. They carry out complex financial frauds that result in direct losses and indirect damage to the institutional reputations and personal financial security. In 2023-24, these crimes cost Australia approximately $13.2 billion. While the financial impact is staggering, the human impact is also very real. Behind every dollar lost to organized criminals are stories of victimization, devastated families, damaged communities, and lost lives. Serious and organized crime is not a single syndicate or a shadowy figure in a back alley. It's a hidden web, complex, adaptive, and ever-changing. Today's criminal networks operate like multinational corporations. They are borderless, decentralized, and digitally enabled. They move money, drugs, people, and data with the click of a button. And they are highly adept at exploiting vulnerabilities in our systems. They are not just gangsters in the traditional sense. They are business people, technologists, opportunists. They embed themselves in legitimate industries like construction, logistics, finance, even healthcare and recruiting, leveraging a range of trusted insiders to provide them privileged access and information to facilitate their nefarious activities. They exploit vulnerabilities in our border controls, sometimes with the help of insiders in the aviation and maritime sectors. In one case, a baggage handler at Sydney Airport was prosecuted for delivering up to a ton of cocaine using his privileged access. A stark reminder that the threat is not just out there, it can also be hiding within our own systems. Criminal networks use encrypted communications, digital currencies, and shell companies to obscure their activities. Driven by profit, they are collaborating more than ever, outside of traditional hierarchical and familial models, forming alliances with other syndicates and sometimes even with hostile state actors. Staying ahead of these evolving and resilient criminal enterprises requires a persistent and coordinated effort on the part of multiple agencies and overseas partners. But what does this mean for ordinary Australians, and why should they care? As I mentioned before, it's easy to think that organized crime has nothing to do with me, but the reality is quite different. Organized criminality can and does impact everyday Australians both directly and indirectly. If I were to draw on a current example, it would be to emphasize the emergence of a criminal network highlighted by Australian Federal Police Commissioner Chrissy Barrett at her recent National Press Club address. This is the particularly disturbing emergence of loosely affiliated, decentralized networks of distinct yet overlapping online chat groups. As outlined by Commissioner Barrett, members of this network, many of them young men, engage in a blend of online and real-world criminal activities, such as child sextortion, sadistic online exploitation, cybercrime, and violent extremism. They target children and vulnerable people, manipulating and coercing them into producing increasingly harmful content. The psychological damage is profound. In some cases, online sextortion has been linked to youth suicides. These are not crimes that happen somewhere else. They are happening here, in our communities, and could be impacting our children and our vulnerable family members. In addition to new and emerging threats, we're also seeing the activities of more traditional organized crime groups intensifying. Consider the story of Australia's illicit tobacco market. Since 2023, efforts by organized crime groups to control the illicit tobacco and vape market have led to over 200 firebombings, at least 3 homicides, including an innocent civilian, and countless acts of intimidation and extortion. Legitimate businesses have been forced to close their doors. Billions of dollars in lost tax revenue means less money for hospitals, schools, and essential services. Organized crime syndicates then recycle these illicit proceeds into a range of other criminal activities, further impacting community safety, security, and the broader social fabric. And the violence is not contained. It spills out into the streets, affecting bystanders and entire neighborhoods. Many of these criminal syndicates deal in a variety of illicit commodities, from drugs to tobacco to firearms to human trafficking, allowing them to shift their supply to meet a variety of demands, no matter the human cost. Serious and organized crime preys on the vulnerable. Offshore scam centers, often run by transnational syndicates, are robbing Australians of their life savings, retirement funds, and identities. The victims are not just statistics. They're parents, grandparents, and young people, left devastated by financial loss and the long, stressful process of recovering their identities. In many cases, the harm is enduring, with stolen identities used to commit further crimes or deny victims access to credit and services. Organized crime is also systematically defrauds government programs designed to help those most in need. The National Disability Insurance Scheme, for example, has been targeted by criminals who coerce vulnerable clients, siphoning off funds meant for care and support. The result is not just financial loss, but mental anguish for the victims and their families, and a loss of trust in the very systems that are designed to protect them. In recent years, the ACIC has detected organized crime groups using incentive payments or kickbacks to defraud the NDIS to the tune of millions of dollars. These groups were colluding with allied health professionals and seeking to coerce prospective NDIS participants, including those from non-English-speaking backgrounds with little or no support networks and with significant disabilities. In another case earlier this year, we identified that a number of fraudulent NDIS providers also had footprints across other Australian government payment programs. They frequently targeted childcare services, with many exploiting charities for tax evasion and money laundering. Some of these individuals also procured fraudulent qualifications in other industries, raising further risks to the risks of harm to vulnerable Australians. In both these circumstances, the ACIC worked with law enforcement and National Disability Insurance Agency partners to disrupt these activities. These greedy, organized fraudsters had no regard for the harm they cause, the vulnerable individuals they exploit, or the broader impact they have on these essential government programs. Legitimate businesses are also impacted. Organized crime distorts markets, drives up costs, and undermines fair competition. In sectors like tobacco, construction, and logistics, criminals use violence, intimidation, and corruption to take over market share. Small businesses in areas affected by firebombings or drug activity see their foot traffic and revenue plummet. Insurance premiums rise, and the cost is passed on to consumers. Even sporting institutions are affected, with illegal betting and match fixing undermining the integrity of competitions. The threat is not just local, it's national and global. Many of the highest risk criminal networks targeting Australia now are based offshore, taking advantage of geopolitical instability and weak governance. They're involved in drug trafficking, money laundering, human exploitation, cybercrime, and more. Increasingly, we're seeing links between organized crime and hostile foreign state actors, with criminal groups being used as proxies or cutouts by foreign powers to achieve their geostrategic objectives, further blurring the lines and complicating the threat environment. This convergence of threats is one of the reasons I chose to deliver my address here at the National Security College, which has been adept in its programming at drawing the thread through these strategic threat vectors and helping to bridge gaps between government, academia, industry, and the public. One of the most significant drivers of growth in criminality is technology, which features prominently in almost all organized crime enterprises and has acted as both a force multiplier and a way to further obscure their illicit activities. Criminals are very quick to adopt new tools: artificial intelligence, cryptocurrencies, 3D printed weapons. They do this to both scale their operations and to evade detection. They use encrypted messaging, bespoke apps and devices to plan and coordinate the shipments of their illicit commodities, launder their money, and to recruit new members. Excuse me. Perhaps most worrying is the recruitment and grooming of young people. Organized crime networks target minors for their unique value. They are cheaper to hire, more easily manipulated, and more accessible online. They are also seen as more dispensable if arrested or killed. What begins as petty crime can easily escalate. One notable group, which started as a youth gang in the late 2000s, has evolved into a major organized crime network, running independent drug ventures and illicit finance operations. The trajectory is clear. Today's youth offenders can become tomorrow's high-threat syndicates. The violence associated with organized crime is also becoming more visible and more brazen, with innocent bystanders and businesses caught in the crossfire. Daylight shootings, arson attacks, and public acts of intimidation are becoming more common. Some groups film and share footage of their crimes, spreading fear and normalizing violence. So-called kill crews, the latest version of guns for hire, are another example of the emerging crime-as-a-service business model. These individuals are hired by criminal syndicates through encrypted communications and other secure digital applications without a dedicated affiliation to any specific criminal group. The increased frequency and intensity of this violence results in our communities feeling less safe, less secure, and more divided. As I mentioned earlier, serious and organized crime is a truly global enterprise. Drugs and their precursors are produced in Mexico, Southeast Asia, and China, and shipped to Australia through a variety of transit countries, including the Pacific. Online scam centers in Southeast Asia target Australians with sophisticated investment and romance scams, laundering their proceeds through complex networks of shell companies and cryptocurrencies. The illicit trade in natural resources, such as wildlife and timber, fuels environmental destruction while providing new revenue streams for criminal groups. This points to the ongoing need and the ongoing importance of strong international partnerships, timely intelligence sharing, and joint approaches to disrupting these transnational threats. All of this comes at a cost measured not just in dollars, but in lives, well-being, and trust. In isolation, the impacts to individuals can appear insignificant or too distant from the source to identify. But when the full spectrum of serious and organized crime harms and costs are combined, we can easily see the enormous damage absorbed by the Australian community. So what is being done, and what more do we have to do? I might be a little bit biased here, but I think I've been around long enough to be able to say that Australia has world-class intelligence, border, and law enforcement agencies. And Australians should have confidence in the strength of our national response. You need only glance at the daily media headlines to see the results. Every day, Commonwealth agencies and our state and territory partners work together seamlessly to detect and disrupt these criminal networks. Major drug and illicit tobacco seizures, arrests, scam center takedowns, and the dismantling of violent syndicates are not isolated successes. They are the product of persistent, coordinated, intelligence-led action. And these determined efforts will continue to foil the activities of criminal actors, deprive them of their illicit profits, and make it more difficult for them to succeed. However, the scale and complexity of the threat does mean that law enforcement response alone is not enough. To further harden the environment against serious and organized crime, we need collaborative, non-traditional interventions in addition to ongoing enforcement. This means strengthening partnerships across government, industry, and the community. continuing to invest in intelligence, technology, and data analytics to stay ahead of criminal innovation, building public awareness and resilience so that individuals and businesses can recognize and resist criminal exploitation, continuing to enhance legislative and regulatory frameworks to close loopholes and disrupt criminal business models, supporting victims and vulnerable populations to raise awareness of the risks and ensure that those harmed by crime are not left behind. While the scale of harm is significant, Australians can be assured that our agencies are committed, capable, and united in the fight. We're also committed to increased transparency and accountability. By opening the books, we're inviting scrutiny, fostering trust, and empowering all sectors of our society to be part of the solution. Serious and organized crime is a national challenge, one that affects us all, whether we see it or not. The harm is real, the costs are increasing, and the threat is evolving, but so too is our response. By sharing what we know and by working together, we can build a more resilient Australia. We can protect our communities and our national interests because resilience is built together through awareness, vigilance, and action. Thank you.